The night of December 2, 1984, started like any other in the bustling city of Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. The city, surrounded by serene lakes and dotted with modest homes, seemed peaceful. But deep within the confines of the Union Carbide India Limited (UCIL) pesticide plant, a catastrophic sequence of events was brewing, an invisible enemy was awakening. By the early hours of December 3, the tranquil air turned into a harbinger of death as a massive leak of methyl isocyanate, MIC, a highly toxic gas, engulfed the surrounding towns. Around midnight, water had entered one of the storage tanks containing MIC. A runaway reaction ensued, leading to a catastrophic buildup of pressure. The safety systems, reduced, neglected, or malfunctioning due to years of cost-cutting measures, failed to contain the disaster. MIC vapor burst into the air, spreading like an invisible death shroud over Bhopal. By morning, over 500,000 people had been exposed. Entire families woke up coughing, their eyes burning as if set on fire. Mothers clutched their children, desperately fleeing the unseen killer, only to collapse on the streets. The official immediate death toll was 2,259, though unofficial estimates suggest that 8,000 people perished in the first 2 weeks. Another 8,000 or more would succumb to gas-related diseases in the decades that followed. For years, the victims grappled with the dual blows of tragedy and injustice. In 2008, the government of Madhya Pradesh distributed compensation to the families of 3,787 confirmed victims and 574,366 injured survivors. But the numbers were cold comfort. Many believed the real toll was far higher, and the compensation a mere fraction of what was needed to rebuild shattered lives. Civil and criminal cases against Union Carbide Corporation, UCC, and its CEO at the time, Warren Anderson, were tangled in a web of legal and diplomatic complexities. U.S. courts repeatedly redirected cases to India, emphasizing UCIL's autonomy. In 1991, local authorities charged Anderson with manslaughter, but he was declared a fugitive from justice when he failed to appear in court. Extradition requests to the United States were denied due to a lack of evidence, and the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed appeals for justice. In 2010, 7 former UCIL employees were convicted of causing death by negligence. By then, most were elderly. Their sentences, 2 years of imprisonment and a fine, were seen by many as a grossly inadequate response to the magnitude of the disaster. The causes of the tragedy were as complex as they were damning. Years of underinvestment plagued the UCIL plant. A $1.25 million cost-cutting initiative led to reductions in safety personnel, equipment maintenance, and standard operating procedures. By 1984, critical safety measures were either poorly implemented or ignored altogether. MIC tank alarms had been non-functional for 4 years. The plant relied on a single manual backup system. Unlike the robust, multi-layered systems used in the U.S., workers frequently raised safety concerns, but their voices were suppressed. Complaints through union channels were dismissed, and one employee was fired after a 15-day hunger strike to urge the management to follow standard operating procedures for safety reasons. 70% of the workforce had been fined for refusing to deviate from safety protocols under managerial pressure. A 1982 safety audit commissioned by UCC revealed 61 hazards at the plant, 30 of which were classified as major. Despite identifying these risks, no follow-up measures were implemented. The Bhopal plant, seen as a peripheral operation, was left to deteriorate while profits remained the priority. Even as Bhopal moved forward, the tragedy lingered. Generations born after 1984 inherited the consequences: health problems, environmental contamination, and social stigma. Dow Chemical Company, which acquired UCC in 2001, maintained that the disaster was an act of sabotage. This claim, coupled with the absence of meaningful accountability, deepened the wounds of survivors. People who had witnessed the immediate aftermath of the tragedy recount the chaos that reigned. Hospitals were overwhelmed with victims, people gasping for breath, their lungs seared by the toxic fumes. Children were orphaned, families shattered. The Indian government, ill-prepared for a disaster of this magnitude, struggled to respond. Relief camps were set up, but they could not accommodate the sheer number of affected individuals. The long-term impact was devastating as well. Victims suffered from chronic respiratory diseases, neurological disorders, and cancer. Pregnant women miscarried, and children were born with congenital disabilities. The land and water around the plant remained contaminated, perpetuating a cycle of suffering. The toxic waste left behind at the UCIL plant site remained a persistent reminder of the tragedy. For decades, it poisoned the soil and groundwater, affecting thousands more. It wasn't until January 2025, more than 40 years after the disaster, that significant efforts were made to remove the hazardous waste following an order from the Madhya Pradesh High Court. This order reignited discussions about the disaster, its victims, and the enduring failures of justice. UCC had been aware of at least 61 safety hazards at the Bhopal plant, 30 of them major. Despite this, no significant actions were taken. The company's hands-off approach and cross-cultural mismanagement amplified the risk. The disaster also highlighted global inequities. Safety measures deemed necessary in developed nations were deemed expendable in a developing country like India. Not to mention the Indian authorities did not do enough to hold the corporation accountable for safety measures. Widely recognized as the world's worst industrial disaster, Bhopal gas tragedy is a grim reminder of the consequences of storing harmful substances in densely populated areas. In memory of the victims of the tragedy and to serve as a reminder for future generations, the Remember Bhopal Museum was opened in Bhopal on December 2, 2014, on the 30th anniversary of the tragedy. The museum collects and exhibits artifacts and records of the affected communities.